My mother-in-law tried to drug me at her birthday dinner. She thought I wouldn't notice when she slipped something into my drink, but I did. And instead of drinking it, I calmly handed the glass to her husband. 45 minutes later, he was pale, sweating, and violently sick. And across the table, her eyes locked with mine. And I knew. She knew I knew. What followed exposed years of manipulation, control, and secrets buried so deep, even my wife didn't believe me at first. But by the end of this story, you'll see how I turned their game against them and forced them to face the truth. My name's Julian Miller. I'm 32, and I make a living as an independent photographer based in Asheville, North Carolina. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I've worked hard, built a solid business, shooting everything from weddings to wildlife spreads in national magazines. But to my wife's parents, I've always been a disappointment. Gerald, my father-in-law, thinks success is measured in stock portfolios and square footage. Diane, my mother-in-law, hides her judgment behind a smile and a casserole. At every family dinner, Gerald would prod about my income. Diane would introduce me as the photographer, like I was just a side character in her daughter's life. I always smiled. I let it go for Haley's sake. But the night of Diane's birthday, something shifted. I saw her do it. I saw her pour something from a tiny vial into one of the sangria glasses. She looked right through me as she handed it over, acting sweet as ever. "Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law," she said. That's when I made a decision. I took both glasses, mine and hers, and carried them to the table. What happened next wasn't just about a ruined dinner. It was the beginning of the end for their illusion of control. And it all started with that one sip. 6 years earlier, I met Haley at a local gallery in Asheville, where some of my work had been featured shots of Smoky Mountain sunrises, a quiet fox curled in snow, a forgotten farmhouse swallowed by kudzu. She stood in front of a photo of a storm rolling in over the Blue Ridge, and we started talking about the light, how it told stories, even without words. She was finishing her master's in environmental science back then, focused on climate restoration and land conservation. Smart, driven, grounded. I was still scrapping together my career, mostly second-shooting weddings and hustling small-time gigs. But she believed in what I was building more than anyone else did. We clicked immediately. We both believed in purpose over prestige. And for a long time, I thought that would be enough. Meeting her parents was the first dose of reality. They weren't rude, not at first. They were polite in the kind of way that made you feel like you'd already disappointed them. Gerald shook my hand like he was assessing risk. Diane smiled too long, too wide, asking questions that sounded friendly, but always landed with a sting. "So, photography? What's your plan, long-term? Or do you have health insurance through your work? Or is that something Haley takes care of?" I played along, answered every question as best I could, even brought copies of a magazine I'd been featured in. Diane flipped through the pages like she was humoring a child. Gerald never looked up from his phone. That was the tone for every family dinner afterward. Haley would try to smooth things over, squeeze my hand under the table, when her dad made snide remarks, change the subject, when her mom offered backhanded praise. "Your eye for composition is beautiful," Diane would say. "You ever consider using it in real estate photography? That market's stable." Every Sunday felt like an interview I hadn't asked for. There was one night I remember vividly, Christmas Eve, 2 years into our marriage. Diane was on the phone with someone in the kitchen. She didn't realize I'd walked in to grab more wine. "Haley could have married Thomas," she was saying. "You know, the surgeon. Family money. But she chose the creative one." The word creative hung in the air like a slur. She never saw me standing there. I never told Haley. I thought I could earn their respect. I worked harder, took on more difficult shoots, risked frostbite and snake bites for breathtaking wildlife photos that ended up in major publications. I brought expensive wine to every family event. I mentioned my clients, by name, editors, gallery owners, environmental organizations. None of it moved them. Gerald still called it a hobby. Diane still introduced me to neighbors as Julian the photographer, as if I didn't share their last name. There were moments that should have been joyful milestones, but turned bitter in their hands. When Haley and I decided to try for a baby, she was overjoyed. I was nervous, but excited. Gerald pulled me aside, rested a heavy hand on my shoulder, and said, "Kids are expensive, son. You might want to think about real employment before bringing one into the world." There wasn't concern in his tone, just cold calculation. I didn't tell Haley. I didn't want her stuck in the middle. But the message was clear: I would never be enough for them. And still, I let it go. I thought time would wear them down, that love and consistency might change their minds. I was wrong. Diane's behavior became more pointed. Anytime I shared a professional win, she found a way to erase me from the room. I'd be telling the table about a new gallery opening, and she'd ask Haley to help her with the dishes or check on the roast. When family photos were taken, I'd conveniently be the one asked to hold the camera. She'd say it with a laugh, but it landed like a dismissal every time. Once during a particularly strained dinner, Gerald commented loudly about Haley's impulsive decisions while looking me dead in the eye. No one said anything. I kept smiling. The pressure built slowly like steam behind a sealed valve. I didn't explode, didn't argue. I just kept showing up out of love for Haley and hoped that maybe one day they'd see what she saw in me. That hope finally cracked the night of Diane's birthday dinner. I'd just returned from a week-long assignment in Montana, tracking and photographing bison through 3 feet of snow. My cheeks were raw from the wind, and my knees ached from the miles I'd hiked. But Haley begged me not to miss her mother's big evening. "Just a couple hours," she said. "You don't even have to talk much." So I showered, dressed up, and drove us to their colonial home in one of the wealthiest zip codes in Asheville. Dinner began predictably. Gerald talked about a recent deal he'd closed. Diane adjusted the lighting and centerpiece 6 times. Haley's brother Owen and his wife Vanessa made the usual small talk. I tried to relax, counting the minutes. Then Diane brought out the sangria. She had 2 glasses already poured, slightly separate from the rest. I walked into the kitchen just as she was adding something from a tiny clear vial into one of them. She nearly jumped when she noticed me. "Oh, Julian, I've got this," she said too brightly. "Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law." I stared at the glass. A faint oily film shimmered at the top under the kitchen light. My pulse didn't race. I didn't panic. I just smiled, picked up both glasses, and said, "Let me help carry these." When I set the glasses on the table, I placed the one she had tampered with in front of Gerald. He barely glanced at it before taking a sip. 45 minutes later, he was rushing down the hall, pale and heaving, while Diane stood frozen, her face drained of color. Her eyes met mine. That was the first moment she realized I wasn't just watching, I was waiting. What she didn't know was that I had more than suspicion now. I had proof, and I was ready to finally use it. As Gerald stumbled down the hallway, pale and clutching his stomach, the entire room fell into stunned silence. Diane dropped her fork. Her napkin slid from her lap onto the polished hardwood floor. Owen stood halfway out of his chair. Vanessa froze her wine glass mid-air. Haley rushed after her father, panic written across her face. I stayed in my seat, calm, composed, watching Diane with a stillness I knew would shake her more than shouting ever could. She looked at me, and something in her face, cracked. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. I didn't follow Gerald. I didn't accuse Diane. I didn't make a scene. I just sat there and ate my cake, slowly, deliberately, as if nothing had happened. But inside, everything had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to be accepted. I was planning how to expose the truth. For years, I had been patient, polite, the dutiful son-in-law who smiled through the disrespect, who never let his wife see how deep the wounds had gotten. But now I had a different mission to uncover exactly how far Diane was willing to go to erase me from her daughter's life. That night, once we were home, and Haley had fallen asleep, I took the untouched sangria glass Diane had handed me and wrapped it in 2 layers of newspaper. I slid it carefully into my camera bag next to my memory cards and lenses. First thing Monday, I made a call to an old client. Jason, a forensic toxicologist I'd once done a magazine profile on. "Can I bring you something unusual?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Bring it over." When I arrived at his lab the next morning, Jason raised an eyebrow. "Personal or professional?" he asked, slipping on gloves. "Family matter," I replied. I handed him the glass. "Check for anything foreign, especially sedatives or tranquilizers." He didn't ask questions, just nodded, then got to work. 3 days later, Jason called. "Julian, there's benzodiazepine in that drink. High concentration. Not lethal, but enough to knock someone out cold. Could cause dizziness, memory loss. Where did you get this?" I thanked him and asked for a formal report. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" he said. "Probably safer if I don't," I answered. I still didn't tell Haley. Not yet. I needed to know why. I needed to understand what kind of person I was up against. Not just a meddling mother-in-law, but someone who had carefully planned to incapacitate me during a family dinner. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, and I had to know what else she was capable of. Over the next 2 weeks, I started digging. Quietly, carefully. I found out Diane had active Xanax prescriptions from 3 different doctors under 3 slightly varied versions of her name. She wasn't just using the medication, she was abusing it. Worse, there were whispers around town. At the local country club, a member claimed Diane had once been caught rummaging through lockers. A neighbor mentioned she'd made a scene at a block party, accusing someone of stealing her bracelet, only to find it in her own purse an hour later. I started connecting dots, building a profile of a woman who'd been spinning stories for years and getting away with it because no one wanted to believe someone like Diane could be dangerous. She hid behind curated floral arrangements, charity drives, and good lighting. But behind closed doors, she was unraveling. The moment that broke everything wide open came quietly on a Wednesday evening. Haley came home holding her phone. "My mom wants to update her Facebook profile," she said with a faint laugh. "She actually asked if you would take new photos of her." I froze. "She asked for me." "Specifically," Haley said. "She said you have a good eye for softening wrinkles." Her words. I agreed. Not because I wanted to help her, but because it was time to look her in the eyes and let her know I wasn't afraid anymore. That Saturday, I drove to their house, alone. I carried my gear in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. Diane was already dressed when I arrived, wearing a silk blouse, her makeup pristine pearls gleaming at her throat. Gerald wasn't home. Before she could say a word, I handed her the envelope. "Before we begin," I said, "you should see this." She opened it slowly. Inside was Jason's toxicology report, copies of her prescriptions, local records from her doctors, notes from my research. Her hands began to tremble. "This is absurd," she whispered, her voice tight. "I would never." We both know what happened, I interrupted. The only thing I don't know is why. Her face changed in an instant. Gone was the fake sweetness. What remained was cold steel. Because you're not good enough for my daughter. You never were, she said, her voice low. A real man provides security. You provide pictures and drugging me. That's security, I asked. It wasn't going to kill you, she snapped. It would have just made you sick. You'd miss that gallery show. Haley would see you as unreliable, just like I knew she would. Her words chilled me. It wasn't just manipulation, it was sabotage, targeted and personal. Here's what's going to happen, I said, keeping my voice calm. You're going to tell Gerald the truth. You're going to stop undermining my marriage, and from now on, you're going to treat me with respect. She laughed, a thin, bitter sound. You really think Haley will believe you over her own family? Maybe not at first, I said, but she'll believe the report and the prescriptions, and eventually she'll believe the people you've alienated. Are you willing to bet your daughter's love on that? For the first time, Diane didn't have a comeback. If this moment shocked you, if you've ever faced someone like this in your life, drop a comment and share your experience. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I promise it only gets deeper from here. That afternoon I walked out of their home without taking a single photo. But I had something far more powerful than pictures. I had the truth. What I didn't expect was how quickly Diane would retaliate. She wasn't done with me. Not yet. 3 days after I handed Diane the envelope, she called Haley in tears. Said I'd been hostile during our photo session. Said I threatened her, made her feel unsafe. It was a performance emotional manipulation at its finest. Haley confronted me that evening, her voice shaking as she asked, "What happened between you two?" I looked her in the eye and said, "She never wanted a photo shoot. She wanted control. And when I didn't give it to her, she decided to make me the problem." I showed Haley everything: the toxicology report, the prescription records, even copies of the notes I'd taken on Diane's past behavior. Haley sat in silence, reading, flipping through pages she didn't want to believe. "My mother wouldn't do this," she said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "I know it's a lot." The next day she went to her parents' house, alone. When she came back, her eyes were red, her movements slow and heavy. "My father says it's all a misunderstanding," she told me quietly. "He thinks you're trying to drive a wedge between us because you feel threatened." I nodded again, already seeing the playbook. Gerald and Diane were experts at turning concern into suspicion, truth into paranoia. And once again I was the villain in the story they were writing for her. Over the next 2 weeks, the air in our home grew heavier. Haley barely spoke to me. She stayed late at work, spent more time at her parents' house. I poured myself into my photography shooting, late into the night editing, until my eyes blurred anything to keep from thinking about how quickly I was losing her. I knew I had to do something undeniable. Then out of nowhere, a small padded envelope arrived at our front door. No return address, just my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a single note. "You should see this." "Vanessa." I plugged it into my laptop that night and watched in disbelief. It was home security footage from Diane and Gerald's house, date-stamped and clear. The first video showed Diane in the kitchen pouring something into a wine glass from the same small vial I'd seen with my own eyes. Another camera caught me entering moments later, taking the glasses. A third showed Gerald drinking from the tampered glass. But that wasn't the part that broke me. What came next was, later that night after Haley and I had left the cameras caught, Diane screaming at Gerald, "You drank the wrong one." That was for him. Gerald's face twisted in disgust. "This isn't the first time you've pulled something like this," he shouted. "You're out of control." I watched the video 3 times, barely breathing. It wasn't just confirmation of what I already knew, it was a glimpse into a deeper, more terrifying reality. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a pattern, and Gerald knew it. The next file showed them arguing 2 days later in their living room. Gerald's voice was low but firm. "He knows what you did." Diane's voice snapped back, cold and deliberate. "So what, Haley will never choose him over us? And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised. Don't worry, I've already started planting seeds. She'll file for divorce and she'll think it was her idea." I slammed my laptop shut. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just about me. This was a coordinated effort to destroy my marriage, to rewrite Haley's reality, and leave her with no one but them. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were trying to erase me. I called Vanessa immediately. "Why did you send this?" I asked. Her voice was quiet. "Because they did the same thing to me. When I first married Owen, they tried to break us apart for 2 years. Said I wasn't good enough, that I was using him. I didn't say anything back then. I thought I could handle it. But I saw what they were doing to you, and I couldn't stay silent." I asked her if Owen knew. She paused. "He believes everything they say. I tried to tell him once. He said I was paranoid. That night I sat in the dark, trying to piece together my next move. I had the evidence. I had a witness. But Haley still wasn't ready to see it. What would you do if your own spouse was being manipulated by their parents, and you were the only one who saw the truth? Would you show them everything at once, or let them come to it slowly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how you'd handle it." The following morning I received a text from Gerald. We should talk, man to man, no wives. He wanted to intimidate me. I could feel it in every word. But I've been walking through this fire long enough to know I wasn't the one who should be afraid. I texted back 1 word when he gave me a time, a place, the country club where I'd never been invited. I packed the USB. I wasn't going for conversation. I was going for clarity, and I was ready to show Gerald that he'd underestimated the wrong man. ChatGPT, John Noy. I arrived at the country club 10 minutes early. It was the kind of place where the ice in your drink was cut into perfect cubes, and the waitstaff knew every member by name. I didn't belong there, and that was the point. Gerald wanted the home field advantage, a subtle reminder of what he had of what I didn't. But I hadn't come to be impressed. I came with the truth. He was waiting for me in a private lounge off the main bar, nursing a glass of bourbon legs crossed perfectly at ease. "Julian," he said, standing up just enough to shake my hand. "Glad you came." I sat without returning the smile. He motioned to the waiter and ordered me a drink before I could decline. "Let's talk man to man," he said. "No lawyers, no wives, just us." I didn't touch the drink. "Then talk." He gave a little chuckle and leaned back, his tone easy. "My wife. She's complicated. I won't defend what happened at the dinner. But let's be honest, this has all been blown way out of proportion. Diane's always been protective." "Protective," I said, my voice steady. "She drugged me." He waved his hand like I was exaggerating. "She takes medication. Sometimes things get confused. Accidents happen." I reached into my bag and placed the USB drive on the table between us. "What's that?" he asked, his smile starting to fade. "Security footage from your house. It shows Diane preparing the drink. It shows me switching the glasses. It shows you drinking it. And it shows the 2 of you arguing afterward about how she gave you the wrong one." He stared at it for a long time, the mask he wore so well cracked just slightly. "What do you want?" he finally said, voice lower, now harder. "I want you both to stop," I said. "Stop poisoning Haley against me. Stop interfering in our marriage. Stop pretending you know what's best for her just because you have money and influence." Gerald leaned in. "You think this is the first time we've dealt with someone like you. Guys who chase a woman like Haley for what she represents. She's from a good family, and you've been living off hope and art." "No," I said. "I've been living off my work. And love. That's something I know you don't understand." He scoffed. "You married into a family that expects excellence, not excuses." I looked him in the eye. "Funny. You tried to erase me, but I'm still here. You tried to control Haley, and you're losing her. You know why. Because people like you think fear keeps families together. But real love doesn't bend to fear. It fights back." He sat silently, no longer smug, just quiet. Then he said something that chilled me to my core. "Ask her about Thomas." "What about him?" I asked. "Before you. Perfect guy. Doctor. We didn't like his background. Took 6 months, but she broke off the engagement. Came home crying. That's when I knew Haley always comes home. Always. That word always wasn't comforting. It was threatening. It was a pattern." On the drive home, I called Haley's college roommate, Bethany. We hadn't spoken in years, but when she picked up, her voice warmed. "Julian, wow, it's been a minute. I need to ask you something important," I said. "About Thomas." There was a pause. Then, oh God, that was awful. She told me everything. How Gerald and Diane convinced Haley that Thomas had been cheating. How they'd fabricated texts, manipulated evidence, planted doubts. Thomas tried to explain, tried to fight for her, but it was too late. Haley had already pulled away. They destroyed that relationship, Bethany said, and Haley never even realized it. She thought it was her decision. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't even just about Haley. This was about control. They had shaped her entire adult life by cutting out anyone who didn't fit their mold. I started to see the full scope: old friends who had vanished without explanation, mentors who had quietly disappeared from her life. It was a pattern, and I was the next one in line. But this time I had evidence. I had stories. I had witnesses. I called Thomas. At first he didn't want to talk. But when I explained what was happening, he emailed me everything: old messages, attempts to reach Haley, unanswered letters. His voice trembled when he said, "I just wanted her to know I didn't lie to her." The next day I started compiling everything: footage, emails, testimonies, statements from people like Vanessa, even Bethany. It was like assembling a puzzle no one had ever dared to finish. If you found out your partner had been manipulated their entire life, would you risk everything to open their eyes? Or would you protect them by staying silent? I'd love to hear what you would do. I knew Haley wasn't ready to see the whole picture yet, but the cracks were forming. Her doubt in me wasn't as certain as before. She was searching for something she couldn't explain, and soon she would come face to face with the truth, whether she was ready for it or not. All I needed now was the right moment to show her everything, and it came faster than I expected. Haley stood in the kitchen late one evening, scrolling through her phone, absently, the sound of the faucet humming in the background. She looked tired, distant. I watched her from across the room, wondering if she could feel the weight I'd been carrying, the truth just beneath the surface, waiting to break through. She set the phone down and said, without looking at me, "Owen and Vanessa are coming over Saturday. Mom invited them for dinner, but Vanessa said she'd rather come here instead." That was all she said, but it was enough. Saturday arrived quietly. I'd spent the morning organizing everything: the USB drive, the documents, the screenshots, the emails from Thomas, the notes from Bethany, and the video files Vanessa had sent. I didn't want to ambush Haley. I wanted to free her. But to do that, she had to see it all: Not just what Diane and Gerald had done to me, but what they had done to her. That night after dinner, I suggested we watch something together. Haley raised an eyebrow when I connected my laptop to the TV. "This isn't a movie night, is it?" she asked. "No," I said. "It's something more important, and I need both of you to see it." Vanessa stiffened. She knew what was coming. For the next hour, the living room fell into complete silence. First the security footage, Diane in the kitchen pouring the drug into the drink. My quiet switch. Gerald drinking. Then the screaming match after we left Diane, furious that Gerald drank the wrong glass, Gerald accusing her of crossing a line. Haley covered her mouth. Owen sat forward on the couch, elbows on knees, shaking his head. "That's not... They wouldn't?" But then came the second video. Diane telling Gerald that Haley would never choose him over us, that she was already planting seeds, that she'd make Haley believe divorce was her idea. Haley's face turned pale. Vanessa reached over and gently took her hand. Then I showed the emails from Thomas, the messages he'd tried to send after their breakup, the letters Haley never read. I played Bethany's voicemail, her voice trembling with regret. They lied to her. They convinced her Thomas cheated, but he didn't, and she never knew. Haley didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared at the screen like she'd been hit by a wave she hadn't seen coming. Finally, Owen stood up. "This has to be fake. You edited this. My parents would never do something like this." Vanessa turned to him, voice quiet but firm. "They did it to us, too." He froze. "What are you talking about? I never told you," she said. "You wouldn't have believed me. But they tried to destroy our marriage, too. Said I wasn't right for you, that I was after your money. They only started treating me better after we had James, because then they had leverage." Owen stared at her, stunned. "Why didn't you say anything? Because you loved them too much to see it?" She whispered. "And I loved you too much to break your heart. If you've ever been gaslit by your own family, if someone's tried to rewrite your reality, leave a comment and tell me how you found your way back. Someone else might need to hear your story." Later that night, after Owen and Vanessa left, Haley crawled into bed beside me. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally she whispered, "I need time to process this, but I believe you, and I'm sorry I doubted you." I nodded. "I understand. I've been waiting for you to see it for yourself." The next morning, her phone rang. It was Diane. I watched as Haley tapped the screen, put it on speaker, and said, "Hi, Mom." Diane sounded chipper. "Darling, your father and I were thinking, why don't you come stay with us for a little while? Get some space, clear your head. Marriage is hard. Sometimes separation brings clarity." Haley's eyes met mine. Her voice was steady. "I've seen the videos, Mom." Silence. "What videos?" "The security footage. Of you drugging Julian's drink. Of you and Dad talking about ending our marriage. It's all recorded, and I've seen it." There was another long pause. Then Diane's voice hardened. "Whatever he's shown you has been edited. You know Julian has always been jealous of our family." "Stop," Haley said. "We're coming over tonight. All of us. No more lies." She hung up, turned to me and said, "They'll try to twist everything. They'll try to paint you as the manipulator." I nodded. "I know. So what's our plan?" I looked at her for a long moment. "We show them who I really am. Not just the man they dismissed all these years, but the man who sees everything they've tried to hide. Because what came next wouldn't just be confrontation. It would be exposure. A reckoning built on years of truth, finally brought to light." That evening we pulled into Gerald and Diane's driveway just before sunset. The house looked peaceful from the outside, trimmed hedges, candles glowing faintly through tall windows, the kind of suburban calm that masks everything ugly beneath it. But inside, something far more volatile was waiting. Owen and Vanessa were already there when we arrived, seated stiffly in the living room, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Gerald met us at the door, feigning warmth. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding," he said, with that controlled smile he always wore like a second skin. Diane stood behind him, silent expression, unreadable. "I brought my gear," I said, holding up my camera bag. "Thought it would be nice to document this conversation for the family archives." Gerald's smile faltered. Diane's arms folded across her chest. "No need for theatrics," she said coldly. "This is a private matter." "Exactly," I replied. "Family business, and I'm part of this family whether you like it or not." I set up the tripod in the corner of the room, positioned the camera, hit record, and took my seat across from them. For 2 hours we laid everything out. No yelling, no accusations, just the truth, step by step. The toxicology report, the security footage, the emails, the testimony from Thomas and Bethany, every lie they told, every manipulation they orchestrated, every person they tried to remove from Haley's life simply because they didn't fit their vision of acceptable. They denied everything. Of course they did. Diane insisted the footage was edited, that I'd doctored it to make her look like a villain. Gerald accused me of orchestrating a smear campaign because I was jealous of their success. But with every denial, I played another clip, showed another document. Every counterpoint was met with evidence. No shouting, just clarity. One brick of truth after another until the entire wall they'd built around themselves began to crumble. Haley sat beside me, silent through most of it. She didn't cry, she didn't lash out, but when Diane insisted once again that a mother only wants what's best for her daughter, Haley finally stood up. "I love you both," she said, voice trembling but clear. "But what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore. You don't get to choose who I marry or what our future looks like. You don't even get to decide what kind of mother I'll be." Owen followed slower, hesitant. But even he couldn't ignore the pile of truth sitting in the room like a living, breathing witness. "I used to think you had all the answers," he said to their parents. "Now I just see control, fear. You manipulated all of us." Diane broke first, not with remorse, but with desperation. "We were trying to protect you," she cried. "You have no idea how the world works. You think love is enough. It's not. Stability, reputation, legacy, that's what matters." Gerald just looked stunned. His eyes scanned the room like he couldn't quite accept the rebellion happening in front of him. He wasn't used to losing control, but control was exactly what he'd lost. Before we left, I handed him a small USB drive. "This contains everything, videos, emails, audio files. It's yours. I'm not interested in revenge. I won't destroy your reputation. That would only hurt Haley. But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever speak against me or manipulate her in any way, copies will go to your country club board, your business partners, and everyone in your social circle." He held the drive like it was a live grenade. For the first time, Gerald looked at me not with contempt, but with recognition. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "you did. If you've ever had to draw a line with toxic family members, if you've stood your ground for someone you love, share your story below. Your experience might help someone else find their voice." 6 months passed. Haley and Owen began therapy together and separately. They were trying to untangle years of emotional manipulation. Gerald and Diane kept their distance. They sent polite texts, birthday cards, offers for brunch that we politely declined. There were no more whispered warnings, no sudden appearances, just silence, calculated, tense silence. Then just before Christmas, a handwritten invitation arrived in the mail. It was from Diane. Dinner, all of us. A fresh start, she called it. I didn't trust it, not entirely, but Haley wanted to go. They're still my parents, she said, and maybe they're trying. I agreed, but with boundaries. We'd stay at a hotel, leave on our own terms. No alone time with Diane or Gerald, no questions about the past. That evening, as we drove through softly falling snow, Haley reached for my hand. No matter what happens tonight, she said, I believe in us. I believe in you. What neither of us expected was what Gerald had waiting for me in his study. And that offer would test everything we had fought to reclaim. The holiday dinner at Diane and Gerald's home felt strange from the moment we walked through the door. The lights were soft, the table was set perfectly, and classical music played faintly in the background. Everything looked staged, like a glossy magazine cover of a family that never fought, never lied, never tried to destroy a marriage from the inside out. But underneath that polished surface there was tension, the kind that builds not from anger but from pretense. Dinner passed without incident. Diane complimented Haley's dress, made small talk about local holiday events, even offered me a slice of her pecan pie without the usual side of sarcasm. Gerald asked about my recent photo series on Appalachian communities, almost sounded interested. It was civil, it was quiet, it was nothing like the chaos of the months before. But after the dishes were cleared, and Diane took Haley into the kitchen under the guise of helping with leftovers, Gerald turned to me. "Can I have a word?" he asked. I followed him to his study. He closed the door gently behind us and poured 2 glasses of scotch. "I've been thinking a lot about your future," he said, "about your family's future." I didn't touch the glass. He sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers like he was negotiating a merger. "Photography has served you well, no doubt. But have you ever thought about diversifying, building something with long-term growth? I could bring you into the firm junior partner track. Full benefits, salary in the high 6 figures. You'd have more time with Haley, with the baby." I let the silence settle for a moment. "You're offering me a job, I'm offering you a foundation," he said. "A chance to step into something bigger. Secure your family's future. You've proven yourself more than I expected. I respect that, but it's time to grow up." I stared at him. This wasn't an apology. It was an attempt to absorb me, redefine me, control me through compensation. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, but no. His smile faded. "Julian, don't be a fool. This is an olive branch, a way to move forward." "No," I said again, more firmly. "It's another way for you to control me." He stood now, pacing slightly. "Everyone has a price. You can act like you're above this, but we both know it's pride talking." "No," I said quietly. "It's boundaries, and it's knowing the difference between earning respect and selling out." He stopped in his tracks, eyes narrowing. "You really think love will be enough when bills start piling up? When your daughter wants the kind of life you can't afford to give her?" "I'll give her honesty," I said. "I'll give her integrity. And I'll never teach her that love comes with strings attached." He poured the untouched scotch down the drain and looked out the window. For once he had nothing to say. When I returned to the living room, Haley was standing near the fireplace, watching Diane flip through an old photo album. "Look at you," Diane said, holding up a picture. "You were so happy when you lived at home." Haley's eyes met mine. She could tell something had happened. I gave a slight nod. She stood up slowly. "Mom, Dad, I have something to tell you." Everyone turned to look at her. "We're having a baby. I'm 3 months along." The room froze. Diane's eyes widened first, then filled with tears. "Oh, Haley," she said, rushing forward to hug her. "That's wonderful." Gerald approached more slowly, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "Thank you," I replied, stepping forward to stand beside Haley. Then I leaned in my voice low so only he could hear. "This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you that." His jaw clenched, but he nodded. It wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. If you've ever had someone try to buy your silence or loyalty, if someone dangled money as a substitute for respect, leave a comment and tell me how you responded. Your story could inspire someone to say no too. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's attorney. Inside was the deed to the house we had been renting, now transferred to our names. Also enclosed were legal documents establishing a trust fund for our unborn child. No note, no conditions, no congratulations. Just clean, silent action. It wasn't love. It wasn't remorse. It was something else. It was a quiet, calculated form of surrender. The only kind of language Gerald knew how to speak. Spring arrived early that year. The air in Asheville turned warm, full of budding dogwoods and the smell of rain-washed earth. And with it came a new opportunity, one that would finally give me the space to show the world who I really was on my terms. When I signed the lease for the space downtown, the owner asked me if I was opening a bookstore, a photography gallery, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. That's bold. He wasn't wrong. In Asheville, art galleries came and went. Rent was high-foot traffic, unpredictable. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't just trying to prove myself anymore. I was done asking permission to exist. I was ready to show the world what I saw through my lens and, more importantly, who I was behind it. The build-out took 8 weeks. I did most of the work myself, painting, mounting frames, hanging lighting by hand. Friends dropped by to help. Haley, pregnant now in her 2nd trimester, brought snacks and music. Sometimes she'd just sit on a stool and watch me work, rubbing her stomach, humming softly. There were moments in those quiet evenings when I'd pause, look around the unfinished space, and feel a peace I hadn't known in years. This wasn't just a career move. It was a reclamation, a place that was fully mine. Not rented, not borrowed, not dependent on anyone's approval. Just mine. We named it Eliza's, after my grandmother and after the daughter we were expecting that summer. I designed the logo myself, clean and simple, no frills. Just like my work, just like my story. The grand opening was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. Invitations went out 2 weeks early. Clients, friends, mentors, local press. I didn't send one to Gerald and Diane, but I knew they'd show up, and they did. The gallery was packed. The walls were lined with pieces from the last 10 years of my life. Portraits, landscapes, documentary-style series from rural mountain towns. People moved through the space, slowly lingering. They asked questions. Some bought prints. One woman stood in front of a black-and-white photo of a father, cradling a newborn, and started crying. "You caught something real," she whispered. "Not posed. Just true." That was the moment. That was the highlight. Not the sale, not the compliments, but the connection. The proof that what I'd spent years building meant something beyond me. And then I saw them. Gerald and Diane walked in together, carefully dressed, smiles rehearsed. They moved through the crowd like politicians at a campaign fundraiser, friendly, composed, observing. Gerald stopped at a series I'd taken in a coal mining town in eastern Kentucky. "This is good work," he said. "Strong composition. I can see the narrative." "Thank you," I said, not offering more. Diane hovered near a shot of Haley, standing in our backyard belly, just beginning to show. She didn't comment, just stared. Near the end of the night, Gerald pulled me aside. "You've built something," he said. "It's real." His tone wasn't condescending this time. It wasn't warm, either. Just neutral, measured. We don't have to be friends, Julian, but I think we've come to understand each other. I nodded. You're not the standard I measure myself by. You never were. He gave a tight smile. I know. If you've ever had to prove your worth to someone who refused to see it, if you've fought to be respected without selling yourself, tell me in the comments how you stood your ground. Someone out there needs your story. As they left, Diane looked back at me once. No words, just a glance I couldn't quite read. Maybe disappointment, maybe defeat, maybe something resembling respect. I didn't need to know. That night after we locked up the gallery, Haley and I walked 2 blocks home in silence. The streets were quiet, the air full of early summer warmth and the scent of honeysuckle. She slipped her hand into mine and said, "They can't touch this. What you've built, it's untouchable." And I realized she wasn't just talking about the gallery. The next morning, a large envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a glossy brochure, Gerald's firm's annual report. My photographs were featured throughout. Landscapes, headshots, building exteriors I'd taken months ago. There was a single note, typed and signed at the bottom. Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. That subtle shift, the one where the people who try to tear you down have no choice but to acknowledge that you've risen anyway. And soon, I would learn that rising doesn't end with recognition. It's about preparing for what comes next. Because the arrival of our daughter would test not just our strength, but everything we thought we'd finally overcome. ChatGPT John Noy. Our daughter was born in July, just past midnight, on a warm North Carolina night. Haley labored for 13 hours, gripping my hand so tightly at times that I lost feeling in my fingers, but I never let go. When Eliza finally arrived, squalling pink perfect, I felt something crack open inside me that I didn't know was still locked. I'd spent so long fighting for space in someone else's world. Now I was holding mine. A tiny life that didn't care about legacies, careers, or country club reputations. Just love, just safety, just us. Haley wept the first time she held her. I did too. Not from fear or stress or exhaustion, but from a quiet kind of relief. The storm we'd endured wasn't gone, but we had reached a clearing. For the first time, the future felt like it belonged to us. The hospital room the next morning was calm. Sunlight filtered in through beige curtains. Nurses moved in and out, checking vitals, bringing juice, whispering softly. Haley slept with Eliza on her chest. A faint smile curled at the edge of her mouth. I sat beside them, camera in hand, documenting everything. Her tiny fingers, Haley's peaceful face, the wristband that read, "Miller Eliza, proof of beginning, of truth." Then Diane and Gerald arrived. They brought gifts, an expensive bouquet, a pale pink blanket embroidered with Eliza's name in gold thread, a basket of organic lotions and baby books. Diane made a show of it, cooing over the baby like nothing had happened. Gerald stood back, measured as always. "She's beautiful," he said simply. Haley was polite, warm even, but distant. I watched her closely. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She let Diane hold Eliza, but only briefly, only under her watchful gaze. When Gerald tried to offer parenting advice, something about early sleep training, I stepped in. "We've got it," I said. Not rude, just firm. He backed off. After 10 minutes they left, saying they didn't want to overwhelm us. As the door closed behind them, Haley sighed. "They're trying so hard to act normal. Maybe this is what normal looks like for them now," I said. She looked at me. "Or maybe they're just waiting for the next opening. If you've ever had toxic family members return after a fallout, pretending like nothing happened, how did you handle it? Did you let them back in? Did you keep your distance? Share your thoughts below your story could help someone navigate the same thing. Over the next few months, things settled into a rhythm. Eliza thrived. Haley adjusted to motherhood with grace and grit. I split my time between gallery work and home juggling late-night feedings with final edits and framing prints. There were hard days, sleepless nights, moments when the exhaustion made everything feel sharp. But there was never a moment I doubted where I was supposed to be. Diane and Gerald, to their credit, or maybe to their strategic restraint, stayed in their lane. They visited when invited, brought gifts asked, before offering opinions, didn't press too far. We'd drawn the line, and so far they hadn't crossed it. But they hadn't apologized, either. Not for the drink, not for the lies, not for the years of control. Their silence hung in every interaction, unspoken but undeniable. One evening, as I was editing a batch of newborn portraits for a client, Haley walked into my studio with Eliza on her hip. "Mom called," she said. "They want us to come for Christmas." I didn't look up. "What do you want to do? I think we should go," she said, after a pause. "But with conditions. We stay at a hotel. We drive separately. No alone time with Eliza. We leave when we want. No arguments." I nodded. "That sounds reasonable." "They're not going to like it," she added. "They don't have to," I replied. "They just have to respect it." Haley sat beside me, bouncing Eliza gently. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think success meant making them proud, meeting their expectations. But now—" She looked down at our daughter. "Now I think success is making choices I can live with, standing by people who don't need me to shrink in order to love me." That moment stayed with me long after she went to bed. It was simple, soft, but it carried the weight of everything we'd survived. And then 2 weeks before Christmas, another envelope arrived in the mail. No note, just a glossy corporate brochure from Gerald's firm. On the cover, one of my photographs, a panoramic mountain shot I'd taken the year before. Inside, more of my work, architectural images, portraits, lifestyle shots, all mine. At the back, a single line typed above his signature. "Hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd want a copy." It didn't say "I'm proud of you." It didn't say "I'm sorry." But it said something. It said I lost. And in losing, he'd finally had to see me for who I was. What would you do if the people who once tried to erase you were now showcasing your work to define their brand? Would you accept it? Or would you see it for what it really was? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear how you've handled being seen too late. As we packed for Christmas, Eliza cooed softly from her carrier. Haley handed me a sweater and said, "Whatever happens this weekend, we go in together, and we leave together." I zipped the suitcase, kissed her forehead, and said, "Always," because I knew this visit wasn't about reconciliation. It was about reaffirming what we'd built, something no one could rewrite, no matter how polished the facade. We arrived at Diane and Gerald's house on Christmas Eve just before sunset. Snow had dusted the rooftops, softening the sharp lines of the home that had once felt like enemy territory. Lights twinkled along the porch rail. Everything looked picture perfect. But Haley and I didn't mistake that for peace. We weren't here to mend the past. We were here to show that it no longer defined us. We stayed at a nearby hotel just like we'd agreed. Brought our own car, packed Eliza's things with the precision of new parents who knew they might need to leave in a moment. Haley held my hand tighter as we walked up the steps. Inside, everything looked familiar. Diane's meticulous decorations, Gerald's Scotch glass, already half empty, classical music humming beneath the conversation. But the energy had shifted. They greeted us like nothing had ever happened. "Julian, you've lost weight," Diane said, as if we were old friends. "Haley, You look radiant." Gerald simply nodded, motioned toward the den. "Let's get you all inside before that baby catches cold." Eliza was the center of everything as expected. Diane Hubbard asked to hold her within the first 2 minutes, and Haley, to her credit, said gently but firmly, "In a little bit, Mom." She just ate. We made small talk. About the gallery. About Haley's job. About Eliza's sleep schedule. It was all polite, but every word carried the tension of people trying to pretend history was a rumor instead of a record. Gerald praised one of my photos he saw in a financial magazine. "Your work's everywhere now," he said. "You've built quite a reputation." I thanked him, but I didn't offer more. He wasn't interested in the process, just the product. That had always been his angle. Dinner was surprisingly uneventful. No jabs, no veiled comments, just awkward attempts at normalcy. Vanessa and Owen arrived late, looking cautious but present. They'd changed, too. There was something more grounded in them now, like they'd stopped performing for people who never clapped. After dessert, Diane brought out a gift, a framed photo of Eliza. "I printed it from the one you posted last week," she said to me. "It's beautiful." I took it and nodded. "Thanks." But I noticed the crop tight around Eliza's face. No Haley, no me. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. Later that night, after the presents and forced laughter and too many rounds of decaf coffee, I slipped away to the back porch. The cold hit immediately sharp and cleansing. I needed air, space, stillness. Gerald followed a few minutes later. He stood beside me, hands in his coat pockets, looking out at the snow. "You've made something out of yourself," he said, after a long silence. "I always was," I replied. "You just didn't see it." He nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe I didn't want to." I didn't say anything. The silence was louder than anything I could have replied. "You know, I used to think control was the same as protection," he said. "That if I made all the decisions, there wouldn't be room for mistakes." "You didn't protect Haley," I said quietly. "You isolated her." He turned his head, studying me. "And what would you have done in my position?" "That's the difference," I said. "I don't need to be in your position. I just need to be present. For her, for our daughter." He didn't argue, just nodded again, the weight in his expression deeper than I'd ever seen. "She's lucky to have you. Both of them are. If someone who once belittled you finally offered respect years too late, would you accept it? Would you take it as growth or another tactic? I'd love to hear what you think. Drop it in the comments. This one's personal." Back at the hotel, Haley sat on the bed, nursing Eliza. She looked up as I came in. "How'd it go?" "He tried," I said, in his way. She smiled, tired but knowing. "It doesn't change the past." "No," I said, sitting beside her. "But it doesn't get to define our future, either." She leaned into me, Eliza nestled between us. And for a moment the noise of the world faded, because no matter how much they tried to reshape the narrative, we were the authors now, and the final chapter was ours to write. The spring after Eliza was born, I found myself standing in my studio one quiet morning, holding her in my arms while the sunlight poured across a row of framed prints waiting to be hung. She was asleep, one tiny hand curled against my chest. Haley was in the next room humming softly while cleaning out a drawer we hadn't touched in months. Our life wasn't perfect. It wasn't always easy. But it was ours, earned, built, and protected. Looking back now, I don't feel hatred toward Diane or Gerald. What I feel is distance, the kind of space that grows when you finally stop trying to make someone understand your worth. I spent years chasing approval that would never come, thinking I had to prove myself to people who only respected control. But I see it clearly now. Strength isn't about forcing anyone to see your value. It's about never letting them take it from you. It's about building a life that doesn't need their permission to matter. Haley and I have become stronger through all of it. Not because we always agreed, but because we learned how to stand together when it counted most. We've built a home rooted in honesty, not appearances. We love without strings. We listen without judgment. And every time I look at Eliza, I'm reminded that breaking cycles isn't loud or dramatic. It's choosing something better, one quiet, deliberate choice at a time. If you've ever fought to protect your peace, if you've had to rebuild trust brick by brick, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. These aren't just tales, they're reminders that we're not alone. And if this journey moved, you consider subscribing to the channel. Here we don't just share stories. We shine a light on the ones that go unheard, the ones that help us heal, grow, and stand tall in our truth. Your voice matters. Your story could be the one someone else needs to hear next.